The listing said, Personal Executive Assistant, competitive salary, immediate start. Daniel Hayes almost didn't apply. He sat at the kitchen table in their apartment on East Lake Avenue, a mug of cold coffee in front of him. Lily's crayon drawings pinned to the refrigerator behind him. Pink houses, yellow suns. A stick figure with curly hair labeled Daddy in 7-year-old handwriting that still couldn't quite get the Y right. He looked at the salary. Then he looked at the past due notice underneath his laptop. He applied. The interview lasted 9 minutes. A woman named Margaret, silver-haired, reading glasses perched at the tip of her nose, told him the role was with Claire Whitfield, CEO of Whitfield & Associates, one of the largest private investment firms in Seattle. She's gone through 11 assistants in 10 months, Margaret said, not looking up from her folder. Daniel waited. Most lasted less than 3 weeks. One lasted 4 days. What happened to them? He asked. Margaret finally looked at him. They left. That was all she said. He got the job on a Tuesday. Lily made him a good luck card that night. She used too much glitter and the front of his jacket sparkled for the rest of the week, no matter how many times he brushed it off. He showed up at the Whitfield building on a Wednesday morning in October, 7:52 a.m., 8 minutes early. Seattle rain came sideways off Elliott Bay, soaking his left shoulder before he reached the revolving door. The lobby smelled like cold marble and expensive flowers. He gave his name at the front desk. The woman at reception looked at him the way you'd look at someone walking toward a closed glass door. He heard her before he saw her. That report was supposed to be on my desk at 7. It is now 8:03. 63 minutes. Can you explain to me what you were doing for 63 minutes? The voice came from down the hallway, sharp, precise, each word landing like a key on a typewriter. Daniel turned the corner and saw her for the first time. Claire Whitfield sat behind a desk the size of a dining room table. She was 38 years old, in a charcoal blazer, dark hair pulled back so clean it looked architectural. She was in a wheelchair. The man across from her, mid-30s, holding a tablet, had the posture of someone trying not to flinch. The server. I didn't ask about the server. I asked what you were doing. The man looked at his shoes. I'm sorry, Ms. Whitfield. Sorry is 63 minutes I don't get back. She turned her chair slightly and noticed Daniel in the doorway. Her eyes moved over him once, fast. You're Hayes. I am, he said. You're 8 minutes early. Yes. That's the only thing you've done correctly so far. She looked back at the man with the tablet. Get out. The man left. He didn't look at Daniel on his way past. Claire rolled her chair to the far side of the desk and picked up a folder. She dropped it on the edge without looking up. Agenda. Read it. Memorize it. I don't repeat myself. Daniel picked up the folder. Understood. My coffee is oat milk, no sugar, 165 degrees. Not 160. Not 170. If you bring me the wrong temperature, I'll know. He said nothing. I have a call at 9 with partners in London. I need the Q3 deck reformatted before then. Fonts are inconsistent on slides 11 through 14. I need a car to Bellevue at 11:30, not a rideshare, a car. And I need my 215 cleared because the person I'm meeting is an idiot, and I realized it last night. She still hadn't looked up. Is there anything else? Daniel asked. Now she looked up. Something in her expression shifted. Not softer, exactly. More like someone recalibrating. Most people, he would learn later, said of course not, or right away, or I'll get right on that. No, she said, that's all, for now. He was at the door. Hayes. He stopped. Don't make me regret this more than I already do. He nodded once and left. The first week, Daniel learned the rules. Not the rules she told him. The rules underneath. The ones you had to watch for. She didn't like the blinds adjusted after 10 a.m. She took her calls standing, or rather with her chair pushed back from the desk, spine straight, shoulders level, The way someone who had once stood for everything now positioned herself to come as close as possible. She ate lunch alone, always, and the container came back to the kitchen untouched at least twice a week. She never asked for help. Not once. On Thursday, she dropped a pen behind her chair. It rolled under a cabinet. Daniel watched her reach for it twice, jaw tight, saying nothing. He picked it up and set it on her desk without a word. She didn't thank him. He didn't wait for it. On Friday, she sent him 17 emails between 5 p.m. and midnight. He answered all of them. At 12:04 a.m., she sent one more. "You're still awake." He typed back, "So are you." She didn't respond. But on Monday morning, his coffee was on his desk when he arrived. The right temperature. He hadn't asked for any. The second week, she tested him differently. "I need you to cancel the Hargrove meeting." He pulled up the calendar. That meeting took 6 weeks to schedule. Hargrove's team flew in from Chicago. "I know where they flew in from." "Is there a reason?" "There doesn't need to be a reason. There needs to be a cancellation." He paused. A short pause. "I'll reschedule them for next Tuesday instead. I'll tell them you had a conflict, but you're committed to the partnership." She looked at him for a long moment. "I said cancel. I know what you said." The silence stretched. "Tuesday," she said finally. "Fine." That was the first time she backed down. He wasn't sure either of them fully understood what had happened. On the 18th day, he was late. Not his fault. Lily had woken up with a fever of 101.4, and the backup sitter lived 40 minutes away and didn't answer until 7:15. He called ahead. He was 22 minutes late. Claire was at her desk when he walked in. She didn't look up. "Your daughter," she said. "Fever. She's okay. My neighbor is with her." A pause. "What's her name?" "Lily." Another pause. Longer. She turned a page. "Don't be late again." "I won't." He set her coffee on the desk. 165 degrees. She wrapped both hands around the cup. He noticed that. The way she held it. Not drinking, just holding. Like warmth was something she didn't get enough of and had stopped admitting she needed. He didn't ask about the wheelchair. It took 3 weeks before anyone told him, and it wasn't Claire. It was James, the building's head of security, a broad-shouldered man from Tacoma who had worked the lobby for 11 years and knew everything. They were in the elevator together on a Thursday evening, and James looked at the floor and said, "She wasn't always like this, you know." Daniel waited. 3 years ago. She was driving home from a fundraiser. November, icy roads on the 520 bridge. A truck ran a red light. James's voice stayed flat. She was in surgery for 9 hours. Her fiancé was in the other seat. He didn't make it. The elevator reached the parking level. "She came back to work 4 months later," James said. "Different person." The doors opened. Neither of them moved for a second. "She used to bring coffee for the front desk crew on Fridays," James said. "Remembered everyone's orders. Every single one." He stepped out. Daniel stood there a moment longer. He started seeing it everywhere after that. The person she used to be, pressing through the cracks in the person she'd become. The way she paused, sometimes, in the middle of dictating an email. A half-second stop, like a word she almost said and didn't. The framed photo on the windowsill she never looked at directly, but never moved. The way she positioned her chair slightly to the left in meetings so no one could approach her from the right side. He didn't mention any of it. He just kept showing up. 7:52 every morning. Coffee at 1:65. Agenda memorized. He learned that she worked hardest when she was frightened. That her sharpness wasn't cruelty, it was armor, worn so long she'd forgotten it was there. He learned that the assistants before him hadn't left because she was impossible. They'd left because she was a mirror, and no one wants to see reflected back at them how close pain and power can live. He stayed. It was a Tuesday in November, 4:47 p.m. Lily had been at after-school care, but the van broke down 2 blocks from Whitfield and Associates, and Daniel's neighbor couldn't reach the building for another 40 minutes. He'd texted the front desk. "My daughter will be dropped off. Please send her up." Claire was on a call when Lily walked through the glass doors of the 32nd floor. She was 7 years old and wearing a purple backpack and a coat with a broken zipper. She had her father's eyes, careful, observant, and a gap between her front teeth, and she was carrying a piece of paper folded into thirds like a letter. She looked around the floor, found Daniel at his desk, and walked straight to him. "Hi, Daddy." "Hey, Bug." He pulled her in for a fast hug without standing. "I'm almost done. You can sit right here." "Who's that?" Lily whispered. Daniel followed her eyes. Through the glass wall of the corner office, Claire was on the phone, back straight, talking. She hadn't noticed them yet. "That's my boss," Daniel said quietly. Lily studied her for a moment. "She looks tired." Daniel said nothing. "Like how you looked tired after Mama died," Lily said. "Just like that. No prelude. Just the way children say the heaviest things, plainly, without knowing to be careful." He looked at his daughter. "Can I give her this?" Lily held up the folded paper. "That's for me?" "No, for her." "Bug! Please, Daddy." He looked at the paper. He looked at the glass office. He looked at his daughter's face, which had that particular expression she got, chin up, eyes steady, when she had already decided. "Knock first," he said. She knocked twice, small knuckles on glass. Claire turned in her chair. For a half-second, her face did something complicated. Then it went smooth again. She said something into the phone, pressed mute, and looked at the child in the doorway. "Can I help you?" she asked. "Flat. Professional. I made you something," Lily said. She walked in without being invited, which Daniel, watching from his desk, saw Claire register with what might have been the beginning of surprise. Lily held out the paper. Claire took it. She unfolded it slowly. It was a drawing, crayon on construction paper. A woman in a wheelchair, drawn the way children draw things, with circular wheels and a stick-figure body. But the woman was smiling, and there were flowers around her and above her. In Lily's careful 7-year-old printing it said, "You look like you need a friend. I can be your friend if you want." Claire stared at the drawing for a long time. "Lily," Daniel said from the doorway, a warning edge in his voice. I know," Lily said. Then, to Claire, "My dad says I'm not supposed to bother you, but you looked sad through the window. People who are sad should know someone notices. My teacher, Mrs. Patterson, says so." Claire's hands, holding the drawing, were very still. "Your teacher is right," she said. Her voice was different. Not warmer exactly, just less defended. Lily seemed satisfied. She turned to leave. "What's your name?" Claire asked. "Lily Hayes." "How old are you, Lily Hayes?" 7. "I'll be 8 in April." Claire looked down at the drawing again. "Thank you for this." "You're welcome." Lily skipped back to her father's desk. Daniel watched Claire through the glass. She was still holding the drawing. She didn't put it down. She put it on the corner of her desk, not in a drawer, not in the recycling, on the corner of her desk, where she could see it. She unmuted her phone, went back to the call. But the drawing stayed. After that, things shifted. Not all at once, not dramatically, but they shifted. Lily came to the office twice more that month, always unexpectedly, always with something. Once a sticker she said was, "For your bookshelf." Once a joke she'd written on a napkin that wasn't funny but that Claire read and reread twice before folding it into her jacket pocket. Claire started saying good morning. Not the first week, not the second. But sometime in late November, Daniel arrived, and she said it without looking up. "Good morning, Hayes." And he said, "Good morning," back, and neither of them acknowledged that it was the first time. She started leaving the blinds up in the afternoon. Small thing, he noticed. She called him Daniel for the first time on a Friday. She was reviewing contracts and needed a page resent, and she said, "Daniel, the third attachment," and then stopped like she'd heard herself and didn't correct it. He didn't mention it. December came. The city strung lights along Pike Street, and Elliott Bay went silver and gray in the mornings. Daniel brought Lily to a weekend company event, a charity thing, kid-friendly. Whitfield and Associates hosted it every year. He almost didn't go. Lily convinced him with a single sentence. "Dad, you work too hard, and we never go places." Claire was there, in the center of the room, doing what she always did at public events, efficient, polished, unreachable. Until Lily found her. He watched from across the room as his daughter simply walked up to Claire's chair and said something he couldn't hear. Claire's face shifted, that complicated expression again, the one that couldn't decide what it was. Then Lily pointed at the cookie table. Claire looked at the table. She looked at Lily. Something in her shoulders changed. They spent 20 minutes at the cookie table together. Lily showed her how to stack the frosting. Claire held the piping bag like it was a contract she wasn't sure she should sign. Lily fixed her grip without asking. Claire let her. When Daniel found them, Lily had icing on her nose and was explaining, very seriously, her ranking system for holiday cookies. Claire was listening with the focused attention she usually reserved for quarterly projections. "She says lemon ones are underrated," Claire said to Daniel. No preamble, just that. "They are," Lily said. Daniel looked at Claire. "She's not wrong." Claire looked at the cookie in her hand. Then she took a bite. January. First Monday, 8:06 a.m. Daniel could tell something was wrong before he reached his desk. The floor was too quiet. 3 people looked away when he came through the door. Margaret from HR was in the hallway with her arms crossed, speaking in a low voice to one of the senior partners. He knocked on Claire's door. She was already at her desk, both hands flat on the surface, eyes forward. Her jaw was tight enough to break something. "Close the door," she said. He closed it. "The board." She stopped, started again. "Hargrove, the one you made me reschedule instead of cancel. He's been building a coalition. 6 board members. They're calling an emergency vote at the end of the month. Governance restructure." Her voice was level, controlled. "They want to remove my operating authority. Leave me as a figurehead. Strip the decision-making." The room was very quiet. "The argument," she said, "is that my condition," the word came out flat, precise, like a piece of glass, "makes me unfit for the rigors of executive leadership." Daniel sat down in the chair across from her desk. He didn't ask permission. He just sat. "What do we have on Hargrove's coalition?" he asked. She looked at him. "You're not running." "Why would I run?" A long pause. "Everyone runs." "I'm not everyone." She stared at him. And then, for the first time since October, she told him everything. They worked for 3 weeks straight. Daniel arrived at 6:30 instead of 7:52. He left at 10, 11, midnight. He drove to Bellevue twice to meet with 2 board members who were wavering. He drafted letters, revised presentations, pulled 8 years of performance data that showed, with absolute clarity, that under Claire Whitfield's leadership, the firm had grown 340% in total assets under management. He sat in on strategy calls she'd previously kept private. She stopped filtering what she said in front of him somewhere around the 2nd week. He noticed when it happened, a Thursday afternoon, when she turned to him mid-thought and said, "What do you think?" Like she'd been doing it for years. He thought. He told her. She didn't always agree, but she listened. Always. There was one night, 11:40 p.m., the office lit only by monitors, rain hard against the floor-to-ceiling windows. When she rolled her chair back from the desk and just stopped. "My fiancé would have hated this," she said. Daniel looked up. He hated boardrooms. Said they were the places where people went to say important things that didn't matter. She looked at the window. He was a high school history teacher. He thought corporations were... She stopped. "He sounds like he was good," Daniel said. Her hands rested in her lap. "He was the best person I've ever known." Silence. "I've been angry at him," she said quietly, "for 3 years. For leaving. Which is insane because he didn't..." "It's not insane." She looked at him. "Grief does that," he said. "Makes you angry at people who didn't choose to go." A long pause. The rain hit the glass. "Your wife," she said. "Yes." "How long?" 4 years. She looked at her hands. "Does it?" "It changes," he said. "It doesn't go away, but it changes." She was quiet for a long time. Then, "Lily talks about her sometimes. Her mom. She says her mom used to make pancakes shaped like animals." Daniel's chest did something he didn't have a name for. "She did. Bears and elephants. Never quite right. We ate every one." Claire's eyes moved back to the window. "I forgot what it felt like," she said, "to have someone just sit with you. Not fix anything, just sit." He didn't say anything. He just stayed. The vote was January 31st, a Thursday. The boardroom on the 41st floor held 14 people. Claire came in at exactly 9 a.m. She positioned her chair at the head of the table. She set nothing on the table in front of her. No notes, no laptop, just her hands, folded, and the expression she wore when she had already decided how things were going to end. Daniel was not allowed in the room. He stood in the hallway. He heard her speak for 47 minutes. He heard numbers: 8 years, 340%, $2.3 billion in managed growth. He heard her name the 2 board members from Bellevue, the ones he'd driven to meet by name. He heard the room go quiet at a particular moment that he couldn't see, only feel through the walls. He heard a vote called. 9 to 5. She kept the company. When she came out of the boardroom, she rolled straight past 3 people trying to speak to her and stopped in front of Daniel. She looked up at him. Her eyes were dry. Her jaw was still set. But something in her face had come loose, something small, something that had been held too tight for too long. 9 to 5, she said. "I know. You drove to Bellevue twice." "I know." A pause. "Why?" He looked at her. "Because you didn't deserve to lose." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she turned her chair and moved toward the elevator, and he fell into step beside her, and neither of them said anything else, and that was enough. February came slow and pale over Seattle. The office changed, not dramatically, not in ways you'd notice from the outside, but Claire said good morning now without being first. She left the blinds up all day. She told Daniel her schedule changes directly instead of through Margaret. She started eating lunch in the common area on Tuesdays. Small things. But nothing small is actually small. She asked about Lily one morning in early February, unprompted. "How is she doing? Her cold?" "Better. She made you something again." Claire paused. "Of course she did." He set the folded paper on her desk. This time, it was a list titled, "Reasons Being in a Wheelchair is Actually Cool," and it included items like, "You always have a seat, and people move out of your way, and your arms get really strong." The last item said, "You can run over mean people, lol." Claire read it twice. She made a sound. Not quite a laugh, but the architecture of one. The beginning of something she'd forgotten how to finish. "She's remarkable," Claire said. "I know. She gets it from somewhere." He didn't answer that, but his hands, reorganizing papers on her desk, stilled for just a moment. In March, she told him about the physical therapy. She'd been in PT since the accident. Mandatory, then sporadic, then, for a year and a half, stopped entirely. She'd been restarting, she said, since December, twice a week. A woman named Dr. Renata Souza, who apparently had the patience of someone who had chosen this exact kind of work on purpose. "She thinks—" Claire stopped. Started again. "She thinks I could try standing, with support, parallel bars." She was looking at the window. "I haven't tried since the first year. I stopped because trying was worse than not trying. When you try and it doesn't work, you've lost something you can lose twice. If you never try, you only lose it once." Daniel thought about this. "That's the saddest logic I've ever heard." She looked at him sharply. "I'm not criticizing you," he said. "I've used it too." Her expression shifted. "After my wife died, I stopped applying for the jobs I actually wanted. Stayed small. Because if I tried for something real and didn't get it—" He shrugged. "Same logic." "What changed?" she asked. He thought about Lily's crayon drawings, about past due notices, about a folder dropped on a desk on an October Wednesday. "I needed the job," he said simply. She almost smiled. He saw the edges of it. "Try the standing," he said. "Not for anyone else. Just to find out." She tried in late March. He wasn't there. It wasn't his place to be there. But Dr. Souza called him. She had his number from Claire's emergency contacts, which Claire had updated without telling him, and said, "She wanted me to let you know. 3 seconds. Both feet." He was in the Eastlake apartment when the call came. Lily was doing homework at the kitchen table. He stood in the hallway and pressed his back against the wall and breathed. 3 seconds. Both feet. He thought about a woman in a charcoal blazer behind a desk the size of a dining room table. Armor and sharp edges, and coffee at 165 degrees. The framed photo she never looked at directly, the drawing she put in the corner of her desk and never moved. He thought about how it looked, sometimes, when someone was breaking open. Not breaking down, but breaking open. And how quiet that was. How you could miss it if you weren't paying attention. "Daddy?" Lily called. "Can you help me with this one?" "It's about fractions." He pushed off the wall. "Yeah, bug," he said. "Coming." April came. Lily turned 8. She had a birthday party at the apartment on Eastlake Avenue. 6 kids, way too much cake, a balloon animal maker Daniel had found on Yelp, who was genuinely gifted. Claire came. She texted the Saturday before. "I don't know what 8-year-olds like. Tell me what to bring." He texted back. "She likes art supplies and animals and books about space." Claire arrived at 2:15 with a set of professional-grade colored pencils, a coffee table book about the Hubble telescope, and a stuffed animal octopus that Lily immediately named Gerald. She stayed for 2 hours. She sat at the kitchen table while the chaos of children moved around her, and she drank the coffee Daniel made. He did it right. He always did it right. And she talked with the other parents and laughed twice, genuinely, at things that were funny. He watched her from across the room. He watched her hold Gerald the octopus while Lily explained his personality at length. He watched her let Lily show her the colored pencils, even though Claire had just given them to her. He watched her look around the apartment. Small, warm, drawings on the refrigerator, mismatched furniture, a home built out of what was left after loss. And he watched her face do the complicated thing. Later, when most of the kids had gone and Lily was asleep on the couch under a party hat and a blanket, Daniel walked Claire to the elevator. They stood in the hallway. "She named the octopus Gerald," Claire said. "She names everything Gerald," he said. The fish is Gerald. There was a cloud she named Gerald last summer. Claire's mouth did the thing again, that almost smile. Closer this time, getting closer all the time. I didn't know, she said, then stopped. Then, I didn't know it could feel like this. He didn't ask what she meant. He knew. Like what? He asked anyway. She looked at the elevator doors. Normal, like a normal afternoon. Like I'm just here. I haven't felt just here in a long time. The elevator came. She looked at him before she went in. Something was moving across her face. Words she was deciding whether to say. Something she'd been holding with both hands for a long time. She didn't say it. But she looked at him in a way that meant she would. Someday. When she was ready. When whatever was still mending had finished mending. When she trusted not just him, she already trusted him, but herself. Trusted that wanting something didn't mean it would be taken away. Good night, Daniel, she said. Good night, Claire. The doors closed. He stood in the hallway for a moment. The apartment behind him was warm and lit and smelled like birthday cake. He went back inside. Some things don't end. They settle. They become part of the structure. Daniel Hayes stayed, not because he had to, not because the salary, which had been renegotiated at Claire's insistence to something that meant Lily's school fees were no longer a calculation he did in his head at 2 a.m., kept him. Not because he was waiting for something. He stayed because leaving had never occurred to him. That was the thing about him, the thing that 11 people before him hadn't been. He didn't see Claire as a challenge to overcome or an obstacle to survive. He saw a person who had been broken open by something she didn't choose, who had built walls the only way she knew how, and who was, slowly, learning that the walls were optional. He saw someone who still brought coffee for the people she cared about. She just had to remember first that caring was something she still did. By May, she was standing for 30 seconds in PT. Dr. Souza had started talking about a walker. By May, Claire brought coffee for the front desk crew on Fridays again. She didn't make a thing of it. She didn't announce it. She just did it. Like a muscle memory returning, like a person recovering not just their body, but their instincts. James from security told Daniel about it in the elevator. The big man from Tacoma looked at the floor and then looked at Daniel and said, she remembered. Every order. Every single one. Daniel nodded. You did that, James said. She did that, Daniel said. Lily kept drawing for her. The corner of Claire's desk accumulated a small, quiet archive. Crayon pictures, joke napkins, a hand-traced paper hand with High Five written in marker, a card that said, You are my second favorite grown-up. Daddy is first, sorry. Claire kept every one. She never moved them. She never put them away. One evening in late May, Daniel was the last one on the floor. He was finishing a report, the building almost empty, the city light bleeding up through the windows from 40 stories below. He heard Claire's door open. She rolled to his desk, set a coffee down, the right temperature. He hadn't asked. You should go home, she said. Lily will be up. 5 more minutes. She looked at the report on his screen. Then she looked at him. Daniel. Thank you. For staying. He looked up. She was looking at him steadily. No armor, no edges, just a woman who had learned, again, how to mean what she said. It wasn't a hard choice, he said. Her hands rested in her lap. It was for everyone else. He thought about that. About 11 people in 10 months. About cold coffee and closed doors, and the particular loneliness of someone who pushes people away because they're terrified of what it feels like when people leave on their own. They weren't looking at the right thing, he said. What were they looking at? What you were. He looked back at the screen. I was looking at who you were going to be. The room was quiet. She didn't respond right away, but when she moved her chair to go back to her office, she went slowly, like she wasn't in a hurry to be somewhere else. Like right here was enough. There is no single moment when a person heals. It isn't a door that opens or a knot that comes undone. It's slower. It's a Tuesday morning when you realize you've been breathing normally for a week. It's a laugh that arrives before you can stop it. It's standing up, 3 seconds, 30 seconds longer, and understanding that the ground is still there. It's a 7-year-old girl who knocked on a glass door and handed a stranger a crayon drawing and said, without any knowledge of what she was doing, "You look like you need a friend." It's a man who showed up 8 minutes early every day and never asked for credit for staying. It's a woman who built walls out of grief and found, one morning, that someone had been sitting on her side of them the whole time. This is not a story about being rescued. It is a story about being witnessed, about someone choosing every day not to look away, about the quiet, radical act of staying when everything about a situation says, go. Claire Whitfield had lost her fiancé, the use of her legs, her faith in people, and her belief that she was worth the effort. She got the last 3 back. The first one, she carried with her. She always would. But it was lighter now, because she wasn't carrying it alone. And sometimes, late on a Friday, when the floor was quiet and the city hummed 40 stories below, she would look at the corner of her desk, at a small collection of crayon drawings and folded jokes, and one hand-traced high five. And she would feel in her chest something she had not let herself feel in 3 years. Something that didn't have a word. Or maybe it did. Maybe the word was home. If this story stayed with you, drop a comment below and tell me which moment hit hardest. Your words are what keep these stories alive. Like and subscribe so you never miss the next one. Thank you for being here. It genuinely means everything. This story follows Marcus Webb, a brilliant black toxicologist whose life was destroyed after he tried to expose dangerous research misconduct at a pharmaceutical institute. Once respected as Dr. Marcus Webb, he lost everything: his career, reputation, home, and marriage, after powerful people discredited his findings. Years later, he works quietly as a hospital janitor while raising his 7-year-old daughter, Maya, in a small but carefully organized apartment. Though the world now sees him as invisible, Marcus never stopped being a scientist. At the same hospital, 9-year-old Chloe Sterling, daughter of powerful CEO Eleanor Sterling, lies unconscious with a mysterious illness no doctor can explain. 18 specialists have failed to find a diagnosis. Eleanor, a woman used to controlling every outcome through power and money, watches helplessly as her daughter fades away. While cleaning the hospital at night, Marcus notices something strange outside Chloe's room: the faint chemical scent of DMSO, a compound he recognizes instantly from his toxicology background. His instincts tell him something is terribly wrong. Quietly, he begins observing patterns, documenting dates, tracking medical staff rotations, and recording chemical traces in a notebook. The evidence points toward a horrifying possibility. Someone is poisoning Chloe. The more Marcus investigates, the more suspicion centers around Dr. Thorne, Chloe's trusted physician. Thorne appears compassionate, ethical, and devoted, exactly the kind of man no one would question. But Marcus discovers a disturbing connection between Thorne's hospital shifts and Chloe's worsening condition. Behind the scenes, Thorne is secretly involved in a financial conspiracy tied to Sterling Corp's stock manipulation, where Chloe's death would trigger massive profits through a carefully timed short sale. Marcus desperately tries to warn Eleanor, but his past and appearance work against him. His PTSD causes his explanation to come out fragmented, and Eleanor sees only an unstable janitor approaching her daughter's room. Security removes him, and he is fired from the hospital for suspicious behavior. Most people would stop there. Marcus does not. Working from a makeshift laboratory beneath his apartment, he uses his remaining scientific skills to create a diagnostic reagent capable of exposing the toxin. Knowing time is running out, he risks everything by returning to the hospital one final night. Inside Chloe's room, Marcus interrupts Thorne just as the doctor prepares another injection. Security tackles Marcus, and once again he looks like the villain. But before being restrained, he asks Eleanor to take a blue vial from his jacket and test the liquid Thorne dropped. She hesitates, torn between the trusted doctor and the disgraced janitor. Then she remembers the look Marcus gave her days earlier, not threatening, but urgent. A look of someone trying to stop something terrible. She trusts him. The moment the reagent touches the liquid, it turns deep purple-black, undeniable proof of poisoning. The truth finally surfaces. Police discover financial records and evidence of a massive conspiracy involving Thorne and an investment group seeking profit from Eleanor's tragedy. Chloe survives. The toxin is identified, treatment begins, and her recovery slowly starts. But the greatest healing happens outside the ICU. Eleanor realizes how easily she judged Marcus based on fear, status, and appearances. Instead of offering money or empty apologies, she visits his apartment and begins again, not with power, but with honesty. The story closes with hope. Marcus is restored to the scientific world as director of toxicology at Sterling Corp's new research lab. Yet he keeps his old custodial badge beside his new ID card, a reminder of who he was, what he survived, and the price of being ignored. Nearby sits a photograph of Chloe and Maya laughing together, proof that compassion can bridge worlds adults often divide. This story reminds us that truth does not become less true simply because the wrong person speaks it. Marcus lost credibility in society's eyes, but his knowledge, integrity, and purpose never disappeared. Sometimes the world dismisses people not because they are wrong, but because listening to them is inconvenient. The story also shows that appearances can be dangerously misleading. Dr. Thorne looked trustworthy, while Marcus looked suspicious. Yet goodness and evil rarely announce themselves clearly. Real judgment requires patience and humility. Another powerful lesson is that expertise and identity are not the same as social status. Marcus remained a scientist even while pushing a cleaning cart. Titles may disappear, but skill, character, and conviction endure. Finally, the story teaches that redemption and trust are possible. Eleanor learns to dismantle her assumptions, Marcus reclaims his place in the world, and Chloe's survival becomes more than a medical victory. It becomes proof that believing in the overlooked can save lives. If this story moved you, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications for more emotional stories about resilience, justice, and second chances. And tell us in the comments, would you have trusted Marcus in that hospital room? Sometimes one decision changes everything, and your answer might reveal more than you think. This story follows Marcus Webb, a brilliant black toxicologist whose life was destroyed after he tried to expose dangerous research misconduct at a pharmaceutical institute. Once respected as Dr. Marcus Webb, he lost everything: his career, reputation, home, and marriage, after powerful people discredited his findings. Years later, he works quietly as a hospital janitor while raising his 7-year-old daughter, Maya, in a small but carefully organized apartment. Though the world now sees him as invisible, Marcus never stopped being a scientist. At the same hospital, 9-year-old Chloe Sterling, daughter of powerful CEO Eleanor Sterling, lies unconscious with a mysterious illness no doctor can explain. 18 specialists have failed to find a diagnosis. Eleanor, a woman used to controlling every outcome through power and money, watches helplessly as her daughter fades away. While cleaning the hospital at night, Marcus notices something strange outside Chloe's room: the faint chemical scent of DMSO, a compound he recognizes instantly from his toxicology background. His instincts tell him something is terribly wrong. Quietly, he begins observing patterns, documenting dates, tracking medical staff rotations, and recording chemical traces in a notebook. The evidence points toward a horrifying possibility. Someone is poisoning Chloe. The more Marcus investigates, the more suspicion centers around Dr. Thorne, Chloe's trusted physician. Thorne appears compassionate, ethical, and devoted, exactly the kind of man no one would question. But Marcus discovers a disturbing connection between Thorne's hospital shifts and Chloe's worsening condition. Behind the scenes, Thorne is secretly involved in a financial conspiracy tied to Sterling Corp's stock manipulation, where Chloe's death would trigger massive profits through a carefully timed short sale. Marcus desperately tries to warn Eleanor, but his past and appearance work against him. His PTSD causes his explanation to come out fragmented, and Eleanor sees only an unstable janitor approaching her daughter's room. Security removes him, and he is fired from the hospital for suspicious behavior. Most people would stop there. Marcus does not. Working from a makeshift laboratory beneath his apartment, he uses his remaining scientific skills to create a diagnostic reagent capable of exposing the toxin. Knowing time is running out, he risks everything by returning to the hospital one final night. Inside Chloe's room, Marcus interrupts Thorne just as the doctor prepares another injection. Security tackles Marcus, and once again he looks like the villain. But before being restrained, he asks Eleanor to take a blue vial from his jacket and test the liquid Thorne dropped. She hesitates, torn between the trusted doctor and the disgraced janitor. Then she remembers the look Marcus gave her days earlier, not threatening, but urgent. A look of someone trying to stop something terrible. She trusts him. The moment the reagent touches the liquid, it turns deep purple-black, undeniable proof of poisoning. The truth finally surfaces. Police discover financial records and evidence of a massive conspiracy